First thing I want to mention about this is Sensei Format has an auto update feature. Well, really it's a semi-auto update. Basically what it will do is it will check for updates for both Sensei Format and Blender, and then inform the user if a new version is available, and then basically walk you through a very quick step-by-step upgrade process to make it really simple to update Blender and Sensei Format, keeping all of your settings intact as you do so. However, with this particular version, because so much has changed and because there's a lot of systemic issues with Blender 2.7a fixed and updated for Blender 2.79, updating to Sensei Format 5.51, if you are a previous Sensei Format user, is going to require a full install of Sensei Format. And I apologize for that. It's really annoying. That's the whole reason why so much development went into the auto update features of Sensei Format, so you wouldn't have to worry about this. But after updating 5.51, we should be good to go from here on out, and the auto update features should function normally. All right, the first thing we should probably talk about is a claim that the second sentence in this article makes, which is, with this update comes the death of Blender View hotkeys. Well, not really, but still a massive addition. When we say Blender View hotkeys, what we're talking about is either the numpad keys on the far right of a regular big full-size keyboard, or the default 1 through 0 keys on the top left side of a regular keyboard. And these are used to usually switch between front, back, left, right views, etc. So let me tell you something. I haven't used either of these set of keys in over 4 months. In fact, when I was preparing for this video, I couldn't even remember anymore which key was front, which was back. And this is because of a new feature in Sensei Format 5.51 called Auto Align View. And I'm very excited and happy about this feature. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Blender with Sensei Format 5.51 installed here. And so normally if we wanted to see the front side of this cube, actually let's go ahead and put something else in here. I'm going to double right click and add a Suzanne monkey head. That way we'll be able to actually tell which direction we're looking at stuff. And I'll get rid of that default cube there. So normally if I wanted to go into the front view and look at this Suzanne head, I would press 1 on my top left regular keyboard keys, which by the way, if you want to check out the most common used Sensei Format and Blender hotkeys and you have Sensei Format installed, you can always go to File, Sensei Format, and click View Hotkeys, which will link you to the latest version of Sensei Format's hotkeys. But back in Blender here, so yeah, normally if I wanted to go into front view, I'd press 1. Or if, say, I needed to work on something, say I needed to work on Suzanne's ear here, and I was in edit mode, and I needed to do something to this ear, and I was like, oh crap, I need to go into left view. Or is it right view? Because I always get confused about, am I looking at the left side or the right side? And usually I'll have to fumble through pressing Blender's view hotkeys to remember which it is. So in Sensei Format, 3 is left, which that apparently is what we needed, and 4 is right. But now we don't have to worry about which key to press, so long as you're using a regular 3-button mouse with a scroll key. So with Auto Align View, all you do when you want to enter a flat orthographic view, such as front, back, left, right, top, etc., you just hold Alt and flick your scroll wheel up or down, just the tiniest bit, and you're instantly in whatever view perspective you need to be in. As soon as you click down on your mouse button to rotate around, you'll be popped back into perspective view. So say I'm in the back here, and I'm like, oh, I need to get flat. I just hold Alt, scroll up, it's done. No more hunting for view hotkeys. No more, switching between left and right views because you're not really sure which one you need to be in. Sensei Format is able to tell the basic vicinity that your view is in. It goes, oh, I see you're closest to a top view here. So when you press this, I'll go into the top view. Or you're looking closest to in a left view here. So when you press this button, I'll throw you into that flat left orthographic view. And to someone who's not used to working with this kind of stuff on a daily basis, that may not seem like a big revelation, but let me tell you, this has drastically increased the speed at which I'm able to work in Blender. So I'm very excited and happy about this feature. So holding Alt and scrolling the mouse wheel up or down will send you into whatever's closest orthographic view. However, you can continue to scroll and you can rotate all the way around your selection by continuing to hold Alt. However, if you do that, it will put you into user orthographic view. But to get back out of that, you can just hold Alt and scroll up again, and then click the middle mouse button and it'll pop you back into perspective view. Or if you hold Alt and scroll up to auto align your view, and you hold Alt and Shift, you can rotate up and down fully around your object, and this all happens in orthographic view. And then to get back out of that, you can either press the perspective key, which in Sensei Format is 7, or you can just hold Alt and scroll up once for auto align view, and then as soon as you click down the middle mouse, you'll be popped back into perspective. So the reason why the hotkey Alt was chosen for this is because we already use Alt and then tapping middle mouse button down to zoom in on a selection. So if you're in edit mode, for instance, then that means Alt tap middle mouse, zoom you in on a selection of mesh, like these 4 faces here. Or if you're in object mode, then that of course means holding Alt and tapping middle mouse will zoom in on your object selection there. So then it's a very natural extension to just say, okay, I want to work on this guy over here. I'm going to tap Alt, middle mouse to zoom in on him. And then I need to get an orthographic view real quick. I'll hold Alt and scroll up, middle mouse, and bam, I'm right there. I'm ready to go. And then I'm over here. I might need to work on this side. Is it left? Is it right? Who knows? Who cares? All I know is I'll be looking at a flat orthographic view in a millisecond of what I need. And now I'm ready to get to work on that. All right, so before we hop into some of the more really huge new features, I want to take a minute to talk about some smaller upgrades that are nonetheless really freaking awesome, and some UI adjustments and improvements. First, I want to talk about the Sensei Format Assets Library, which you can open by pressing this little button here. And what this will do is expand whatever folder you happen to have open in this little panel here. It'll expand it large in this area below. So normally when setting up the assets library, I encourage people to set this area, which I explain in another video how to do that, to a location on their computer, say where they keep all their models, textures, whatever, all your Blender stuff you want quick access to. So if we press this, what this will do is expand whatever's open here into this area down here. So for instance, if I were to click on this models folder, we'd have quick access to those. And say I wanted to append something from here into the current scene, I could just right click my mouse to move my 3D cursor and select something like this bottle I wanted to bring in, then press append, and that will bring that bottle into the scene. So before this latest update, this feature is really awesome, but it was required to have this panel open. So now actually, if you want to close that, you can, and this button will still remember the folder that you had it set to. So if you prefer to not have that little folder window open all the time, you can close it. You can even go to File and Save Startup File and keep it like that, and you'll still be able to access your library whenever you want, which is really nice. A couple other things added to the assets library is this little button here. So by default, when you're loading a file into your scene, in the previous version, the Sensei Format Assets Library would basically link or append everything from that file except for cameras and lamps, because it assumes that you're probably just using this as sort of a traditional object library. Now you can actually set which objects you do or don't want to be appended. And you can also save those changes in your startup file if you want to keep those changes default. So right now, by default, we have camera objects and lamp objects excluded, which means whenever we append or link something from down here, it will not bring in cameras or lamps. However, if we did want it to do cameras or lamps, we can turn those options off, Or if, say, we want it to exclude armatures and we only ever want it to bring out just mesh when we append or link something, we can do that. So that's a very useful addition there. The next thing is this new quick widget button for displaying the content inside of the library. So what this does, if we press this, this will change this to the largest size. And so we can set the 3 different sizes of whatever thumbnails are displaying. We can also click this to turn off thumbnail display. And so we've got a very condensed list display of objects in our library. So this is just a quick condensed way of quickly setting some of the options available here in a default Blender file manager window. This is especially useful when looking at, say, environment images. So for instance, here I've got the 16K HDR Sky Pack available at blendersensei.com, which you can, increase the size of this to large, so you've got a much bigger viewing area to figure out what you want to add to your scene there. Go ahead and close the library up. So if you're someone who has been using Sensei Format for a while, then you may have noticed that the editor type selection button here down in the dope sheet timeline area has been added back to this area here. And really the adjustments to the Sensei Format assets library, which no longer require that little window being there if you don't want it there. I personally like having it there because you can still use Blender's regular drag and drop default features from that little window, which I like opening files from it sometimes. But sort of the reason why this button was added back there is in combination with being able to close that little area up if you want to. So what this does is it allows you to set this to something else, and because there's no longer that little file browser window there anymore, you're not like automatically stopped when you try to drag this window up. And so it allows you to much quickly and easily split your default work screen into just 2 big editor types, so you've got a lot more room to deal with stuff if, say, you're working with a UV mapping or something like that here. And then when you're done, you can just quickly switch this back to the default Sensei Format dope sheet timeline area. Kind of a bunch of things working together to produce an overall smoother experience there. So speaking of the timeline animation area, I'm very excited to announce a new feature that you probably would have assumed is in Blender default, and you'd be right and both wrong at the same time, because they have a feature that lets you sort of do this thing, but not exactly. And so what this is if we click this timeline options button here, is the ability to time remap with frames per second change. Of course, you can change the frames per second of your animation here with this little slider here. So for instance, if with this cube selected, I were to press F to insert a keyframe, and the F key in Sensei Format, and while you're in object mode, actually does something called frame fast. It's a way of quickly prototyping an animation. Basically what it will do is insert a keyframe and automatically move your timeline down 1 second, whatever you happen to have 1 second set to. We currently have it set to 30 frames per second. But what it does is let you enter a bunch of keyframes, make some small changes like rotating, scaling, or moving your object. You can tap F again, do some other thing, whatever, and tap F again there, and then, I don't know, I'm just making something so we can have a quick little animation here. So we've got like 4 seconds of animation here, which goes at 30 frames per second. And right now, if we were to change the FPS, this will affect the actual time scale of our animation. So if I were to change this to, say, 60, now my animation has actually gone down to only 2 seconds long. So you can see, because it's gone from 4 seconds to 2 seconds, it's going much faster, which may not be what you want. Sometimes you want to be able to just quickly adjust frames per second entirely for the purpose of changing the quality of the animation and not affecting the time. So if we switch this back to 30, which is what it was set to, and it was 4 seconds long, now we can change the frame rate of the animation in a way that's very intuitive and comprehensible by just changing the frames per second, without affecting the time. So to do that, we click this, click time remap with FPS. Now whatever we set this to, our animation will remain the same length, but the quality will change. So if we dropped it down to something crazy like 5 frames per second, and notice that this timeline scale changes, but the actual time doesn't change. So if I zoom in on here, you can see that this is still 4 seconds long. We've changed the frames per second, but the length of the animation is still the same. So if I press play, we'll just see this incredibly choppy animation, but it's still occurring over the same length of time. So in contrast, if we were to bump that up to a much smoother 60 frames per second, once again, the zoom of the timeline changed, but the actual length of the animation is still the same. See, it's still 4 seconds. So now that we've got that up to 60 frames per second, we press play. It still takes the same amount of time, but now we have an extremely smooth, buttery, 60 frame per second animation here. And one of the main reasons that I did this is whenever I'm making animations in general in Blender, I'm not exactly sure why, but I find that when I take the frames over to Adobe Premiere or something like that, that typically the animation will work a lot better if I render it out 30 frames per second using Premiere, but I add an extra like 5 frames per second in Blender. And this allows me to quickly do that by just changing the frames per second and not have to like worry about rescaling keyframes or anything like that. So once again, that's this animation at 60 frames per second. It's the same length of time, and we could drop it down to something really bad like 15. I'll zoom in on there so you can see it's still 4 seconds there. And then we play that. It's the same length, just really crappy now. Okay, so a few other improvements that have been made regarding animation. So if you click on the animation tab, this Keyframe Tools menu is an addition from Sensei Format. The interface of this menu has been adjusted to be a bit more self-explanatory, in addition to the ability now to delete specific axes of keyframes on objects. So say for instance, I were to press F to do a frame fast to insert a keyframe and move the timeline down a second here, and then grab this and rotate it in some way and scale it. Hit F again and just, repeat this kind of random process here. And so we've got a few seconds of animation here. You can always use this keying set to set which parts of transformation means moving in some way basically, or scaling or rotating. You can set which type of transformation by default you want a keyframe to be entered into whenever you press I to just insert a regular keyframe in Blender. However, I don't like working this way. I like to be able to insert a keyframe for everything all at once. And then if I need to specifically get rid of part of an animation, I can do that in a top-down way. So for right now, if we were to press play, we can see this animation going. However, say we wanted to make a subtle variation to this. So say I were to press D to duplicate this cube and then right click so the new duplicated cube will snap back to exactly where it came from. Right now, if we were to press play, it's actually 2 cubes here, but they're animated with the same exact keyframes for the same exact location. So they, they're on top of each other all the time. But for instance, if this second cube, I could delete, say, all of the rotation values in it by clicking this. Now if I press play, we'll see that cube moving, but it never rotates. So we can turn off visibility of the first one for a second, just so we can see this very Borg-like movement cube going on here. But added with 5.51 is the ability to delete just specific parts of those keyframes. And they're not actually parts, if you want to get technical, they are keyframes, but I think of them, I think it's useful to think of them as keyframe parts of a whole for the entire animated keyframe for that object. So location, that is movement of a thing. We have this thing moving, let's see. Well, looks like it moves all over the place. So for instance, if I were to delete only the Z location keyframes in this second object we duplicated by clicking this, now that object won't move up ever. So we can still see it. It's basically following it like a shadow, which is kind of a neat effect now that I think about it. The main reason why I invested time in being able to remap keyframes with the frames per second easily and do this stuff is because I started using Blender a bit more for basically making motion graphics for basically some video overlay stuff. So like if you say you want like a really cool like message background display thingy, these kind of tools are really useful for, you know, keying stuff like that. One last thing I'll mention about the timeline is that one of the menus has moved. The quick access to keyframe interpolation, which is normally here, has been moved next to the reverse and mirror buttons, which of course you can reverse and mirror things. So for instance, if I were to press B to do a border select all these keyframes and press mirror, we get this nice mirroring. So it'll go all the way to the end, and all the way back. But the key interpolation menu has moved here just because I thought it would be a bit nicer to have it near these other keyframe operations here. We could use this to set the interpolation. We could click this, add some like bounce effects, and maybe for this top one, add an elastic effect. Back. Setting interpolation of keyframes is also really useful when making motion graphic-y type stuff. All right. Okay, everybody, time for some really big reveals. So let's press T to open our tool shelf and property shelf. First thing you'll notice here in the builder menu is that this top button has changed quite a bit. So we still have access to our default builder options, which we've got a few new options and settings available here. The option for HD shading has been removed from this menu and added to a quick direct button you can press here. And what the HD shading option does in Sensei Format is it turns on ambient occlusion for the 3D viewport. It also activates scene lights and bumps up their allowance for RAM consumption really high, so you can have some really nice high quality lighting, shadows, and ambient occlusion. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A and add a plane and maybe duplicate this cube around a few times so we've just got some more interesting stuff to look at. So now we can turn on HD shading by just clicking this button here. And we instantly have sweet shading. And this can be really useful when modeling or just designing in 3D in general. So for instance, if we were to look down at a top orthographic view, this kind of information can be a bit more useful than, say, the way the default viewport shading looks from a top orthographic view, which is can't really see anything very well. This isn't a new feature of HD shading, but I just want to mention that if you are in Cycles Render, this option will temporarily take you back into a Blender render mode because shadows are not yet available in Cycles mode. So it needs Blender render to be able to access that. As soon as you turn it off, this will of course switch you back to Cycles. So it's just a nice little quick feature to work with some shadows and ambient occlusion. And as the new EVE engine develops and we get more and more cool 3D viewport, live, cool lighting options and stuff, this button will most likely continue to evolve to basically do the most advanced display possible without actually performing a render preview, which would really bog down actually trying to get some work done. So that's sort of the purpose of that, and it has moved to the outside of the menu. To the right of that, we have this. We're not going to talk about this. We're going to wait just a minute for that, so hold your horses for that. But to the direct right of that, we have what used to be on the outside of this little menu, which is just access to the set origin and snap selected to cursor options here. So of course in Sensei Format, we can quickly press Shift and right click to snap our cursor to a part of the mesh of a particular object. And so, I mean, that looks like it's floating in space. That's just because that's the effect of this subsurface modifier that's on this cube, but that's where its core mesh lives right there. So if we were to shift right click near somewhere, it will either go to the center of or an edge or a point or whatever. And this works even while you're in object mode. But we can reset an object's origin by shift double right clicking. So shift right click to set it, and then shift double right click to move that object's actual origin point there. But then we have some more traditional options here if you want to be able to quickly set one or a bunch of different objects' origin points. So if you are an avid Sensei Format user, then you'll probably notice that missing from this tool shelf is that big giant align to grid button, as well as the snap button that was positioned next to there. So I removed the snap button because that's just the same button as this button here down in the bottom 3D view header menu, and I thought it was a bit redundant. And actually that big align to grid button has evolved and moved up here in the top builder menu to become the align to grid foursquare, I guess is what I'm calling it now. But so if you're not familiar with what align to grid does, is it snaps the object's origin point. It used to snap it to the farthest bottom left portion of that object's bounding box. And the reason for this is yes, there's a lot of snap options in Blender default, but sometimes they don't really accomplish what you want. So for instance, if I were to double right click and add a monkey head and then go into orthographic view, just using Alt and scroll up just a little. We've got this monkey head here, and if we were to turn on snap and press G to grab, that snaps it, but it doesn't actually snap it to the grid. As you can see, it's not snapping to grid points. However, if we turn on this button here, now the object will snap to the grid. But if you're not really familiar with what origin points are and all that, you may be confused, like, what do you mean it's snapping to the grid? Like, its ear is still like far away. What do you mean it's not doing it? But what Blender means when they say snap to grid is the object's origin point here. So if I press Z to go into wireframe and I press G to grab and move this guy, you can see wherever it goes, the object's origin point snaps to that grid line there. And we have different ways we can change this. But basically nothing to get this to be flush with the grid in a way that's useful when constructing things. So that's what the align to grid button does. But now, rather than just always automatically aligning something to the bottom left grid, which would be what would happen if I pressed this, as you can see, it's now flush with both the bottom and the top of the grid. Now we can set one or multiple objects' origin points to any direction relevant to what we're facing. So that's actually how this works. So this actually uses a piece of code in it similar to what I wrote for the auto align view feature. Basically, it's capable of telling which quadrant you're basically in when you're viewing or looking at something and then working contextually. So for instance, if I were to select all these dudes right here and press this, that would snap all these to the grid. And if I were to Alt and scroll up, notice that they're all now flush with the bottom right section of the grid. If we were to be looking at them from this right angle here, this will mean something different looking at it like this than like this. And it will do what you expect is move everything down to the bottom right section of that. So if we Alt and scroll up there, we can see that these have been moved flush to the grid like that. And it basically works like that from any direction that you are, go ahead and select all these things here, any direction that you are looking at stuff. But you don't even have to actually be in an orthographic view. It can detect which view you're closest to and will automatically align stuff up in that way. And so having these buttons right here is really useful for this next massive feature that I'm going to now introduce, which is Pocket. So I'm going to click this to open Pocket. So the Sensei Format Assets library is nice and very useful, especially when you're working with, large scenes and stuff. But I wanted something that could drastically increase the speed at which I was able to work, create, and view things. So basically I invented the construct from the Matrix. That's what this is. It's the ability to select a different pocket and put things in your pocket and take things out of your pocket, and then immediately have access to it by hovering your mouse over it, clicking on something, and then it's immediately in your hand, regardless of what it is. Pocket also auto-generates thumbnails for you, and it can use either default mesh like this, or you can put something in your pocket and have it save with matte cap shading. So for instance, this bottle here, I have to select all of this and say to change the shading to matte cap and click something nice and shiny and green. If I press put in my pocket, now this object has been put in there and we can look at it through the lens of that matte cap. Also, if we add a material to this, so if I turn this matte cap off and say we were to click on material, click new, and I don't know, just some random thing. Of course, I don't have any UV mapping or images on this, which I could, and those would show up in the pocket render. So we have something like this. We can press put in my pocket. And now we have that representation of it in the pocket. So there's no manual rendering of thumbnails or having to save files or type in new names of things. It all is handled automatically. So I've got planned a much more extensive video on the pocket feature, as well as some other features covering the ins and outs. But basically up here, we have an X button, which can delete objects. So there's that object there in our pocket. If I want it gone, press X, and now it's removed. These buttons under here, what this button will do is it will allow you to link objects from your pocket rather than just adding them. So say if I press A to select everything and X to delete. So right now without this button down, if I click this, this will bring this object out of my pocket into the 3D view. But notice these are all individual objects and we still have snap on. I'll turn that off. So we've got these different objects that were placed in that file here. These are parented to that guy. That's why they're moving around. However, if I press this link button, what it will do is it will create a group instance of all of the objects within that file and link it to your current file, rather than just place it in there. And the advantage of that is if we use this and then click on this object, see it now moves as one object. There's only one origin point. The advantage of this is whenever you link a file, no matter what it is, it's automatically instanced so that you'll be able to do things like animate it, transform it, rotate, scale, and move and stuff, or whatever. Crazy looking. Looks like a ghost is doing something wild to it. And what we could do is, I don't know, let's save this file, save as desktop. We'll call it example 01. Save as Blender file. File, quit. Hope I don't have anything stupid on my desktop. No. So there's that file there. And open up new Blender file. And say we had some scene we were working on. It was a lot fancier than just 4 stretched out cubes. And we opened up our pocket and we turn this link button on and we click this here. Say we had a few of these, why not? And so we've got some couches here, and I'll close that up and we'll say file, save as, we'll say example 02. Okay, so we've got these two files. We've got this first one where we just brought the one chair in there. And I'll go ahead and add something else here so this is less confusing. So there's some context. And I'll go ahead and save this. Okay, so we've got this first file with some monkey heads and one of these chairs that we brought out of the pocket using link instead of just regular pulling it out. And we'll open up this second example file. There we have the couches and those 4 cubes. But because we linked these, say we were working on another blend file and we open up our pocket, we can click this button here, which allows us to edit whatever item you put in your pocket. So we have this chair selected here, which if you prefer to display labels here, you can also come down here and turn on show pocket labels so you can see the actual names of these things. But I typically like to keep that off because I like to keep things as simple as possible. But if we click this, we're taken instantly into that file, immediately transferred into it. And we could, I don't know, add a material to this and maybe scale it up or something, and maybe make these super long or something ridiculous. And now all we do is press back to get out of this, and this will take us to whatever else you were working on before. And you can see those changes are immediately represented in our pocket. And the file we were working on before, you don't have to save it ahead of time. It doesn't matter if it's saved or it is or whatever. All this stuff is handled automatically and contextually. So because we linked that pocket object, if we open up these original two, you can see the changes are represented in all of the files where that linked pocket object exists. So that's huge. That's a big, awesome, awesome aspect to Pocket. Okay, here back in a clean new file, I'm going to open up Pocket here. And by the way, the edit feature, you don't have to use that just in combination with stuff you've linked. You can use this to edit anything you've put in one of your pockets. So say I were to select these here, and I wanted to edit this core file, I just click that. I'm transported immediately into it, and say, I don't know, I just wanted to duplicate these a bunch, or do anything in this file I wanted, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You'll notice there's 3 right there now. And now if I decide, you know what, I don't want to save these changes, just take me back to where I was, you can press this cancel button. But if you do, of course, you just press back, and there are the changes reflected in that Pocket file there, which is freaking awesome. So you can add as many new pockets as you want, or as much space as on your computer, I guess, by pressing this little plus button. So if we click this, this creates a new pocket. And as soon as we've created one, we can click it and rename it whatever. Let's call this sword stuff. And I'll press A to select everything, X to delete, Shift A, and under mesh, add a cube. And I want to make like a sword. I'm going to tap W a few times, which in Sensei Format adds smooth shading and a subsurface modifier when you first press W, and then continually pressing it amps up those subsurface levels there. I'm also going to use a new updated feature, which is the Sensei Format Better Mirror, which I've renamed to Quick Mirror. What Quick Mirror will do now by default is if you have something selected and press Shift W, is it will immediately bisect and mirror that object. If I press Tab to go into edit mode now with that cube we had, and I select the face and press E to extrude, notice that all these actions are mirroring perfectly as we edit our mesh here. Since we're already talking about Quick Mirror, I should probably go ahead and explain a few more features of that. So Quick Mirror, Shift W, exists to handle a bunch of different mirroring operations contextually. So if we've got one object selected, say this monkey here, tap W a few times, give it some shading, and I press Shift W, that will add a mirror modifier and perfectly bisect the mesh. So if I press Tab to go into edit mode, select one side, notice that it's all mirroring now. However, if we have more than one object selected, what this will do is mirror whatever you have selected around the active object, which basically means the last thing you shift selected. So for instance, if I were to press G to grab and move this weird Suzanne goat head, whatever, over here, And say I wanted this to be mirrored around this object. All I do is click this, shift select that object. And then in this context, having more than one object selected, shift W will mirror the selection around whatever you have selected. And will also parent it to that object. So now when I click on this main object here and press G to grab and move it around, these guys are always going to move with it. And I'll be able to mirror these like this. And additionally, press tab to go into edit mode. And whatever changes I make on this side happens on that side. So that is a very useful feature. So by default, the shift W will bisect and mirror on the X axis, but there's a really cool feature to this. If you press shift W and then immediately press it again, you can rotate through which axis you want this thing to be cut and mirrored. The important part is that you don't move your mouse or press middle mouse button until you've decided which one you want. And so the bisect and mirror option will display up here as you're pressing it. So say I press shift W the first time, it'll say mirror using -X, but I can go ahead and change this to something else. I can cycle through positive or negative values. And then as soon as I let go, the mirroring option will complete there. And so yeah, now it's mirrored like that. And we can do this as many times as we want. So this time I'll press shift W and cycle to where it says +X and then let go. And now this thing is mirrored in a variety of very strange ways. So yeah, now as we edit this mesh, we've got some true craziness going on here. So yeah, that's the new shift W quick mirror feature. Also, in the same way that you can cycle through the mirror axis before selecting which one you want to cut and mirror with one object, when you have two objects selected, like we did with this thing over here, so I'll shift select this one, you can continue to press shift W to cycle through the axis of which the objects are mirrored around the selected object. And of course, mirrored around in Blender speak means the object's origin point. So this big, weird, I guess what was going to be a sword thing's origin point. So if we press shift W with those selected, now we're dealing with this being mirrored around this guy like this. If we press shift W again, now we're dealing with being like this. So it's just a quick way to cycle through until it does the thing you want it to, basically. Okay, back to our sword stuff pocket we made. Let's go ahead and, I guess, make a sword to stick in there. With this default cube, I'm going to tap W about 3 times to give it some smooth shading. Press shift W to mirror bisect. And I'm going to press shift W in edit mode, which does a loop cut, and then scroll up to increase that from 1 cut to 2. Click to confirm that, and select this face here. Let's see, what do I want to do with that? Control Z, E to extrude, S to scale, G to grab, and then E to extrude again. Scale that up like that. E to extrude again, so we've got some kind of handle situation going on. Maybe shift W a couple times to add some more loop cuts. Space for face selection, alt select this loop of faces here, and I'm going to press shift D, which performs object from selection. Basically, whatever mesh you have selected of an object, it creates a totally new object from that mesh selection in Sensei Format. And I'm going to press E to extrude, and then S to scale that extrusion. S to scale middle mouse to constrain to bring that in some. And maybe I'll alt shift select some loops of faces here. Probably getting way more fancy than I need to for this demonstration. E to extrude again, S to scale, and tab for edit mode, A to select everything, S to scale. And let's press G to grab and bring these in. I don't know, I have no idea what I'm making here. All right, let's make press E to extrude, S to scale. So we've got some like knob type deals. Hold Alt and Shift, select these loops so we can bring this in some. And E to extrude, S to scale, E to extrude, and bring that up. So we've got a little bit of an overlap. E to extrude down. This nice sweet little handle. E to extrude again. Looks like it'll probably work. And now let's press Shift D again to do another object from selection. So we can make this blade. And you know what, actually I probably don't need this to consist of this many faces. What the object from selection does is if an object is using a subsurface modifier or multi-resolution modifier, is it will add new mesh to ensure that the new object actually conforms to the shape it was like pulled from. But in this situation, I just need something, a shape more simple. So I'm gonna press Tab to get out of edit mode, X to delete. And in my builder options menu, I'm going to turn off advanced object from selection there. And I'll go ahead and close this up for now. Now if we go press Tab to go back in edit mode and press Shift D to do an object from selection, we have it. See what I was talking about? The advanced object from selection option ensures that the new object created from the mesh selection wraps perfectly around the object. Whereas this is the actual mesh that was here, these two faces down there. However, pulled away from the context of the rest of the object because of the subsurface modifier, it looks different. I'm getting way too advanced. Anyway, let's click on this thing and make a sword blade. Press E to extrude. Grab this bottom one, E to extrude that down, S to scale. S to scale, middle mouse to constrain, G to grab, bring this out. Since these are mirrored, this blade is actually mirrored. And I'm going to shift scroll up for edge selection and G to grab, and maybe I can pull that in and give a little bit of an indentation. Maybe we'll add a edge loop by pressing Shift W and clicking here. S to scale. Maybe we can bring those guys in a little. I think I'm going to shift select these and E to extrude this a bit. There we go. Nothing too fancy. Looks like we got a little bit of a collapse issue there. So I'm going to click open this mirror modifier, turn off clipping, and turn off the visibility of that modifier there. And yeah, this definitely shouldn't look like that. So we'll press G to grab, pull that out some, and using Alt tap middle mouse and Alt scroll up for auto align view. Now when we turn on the visibility of the effect of this mirror modifier on this object, and press A to select everything, G to grab, move it apart. So when we turn on clipping and bring this guy back in, it should fuse nicely there. This one vertex point's wanting to be difficult. I'm going to pull this point back, so there we go. Now it's being good. All right, currently if we select our sword handle, press G to grab, those object from selections we created don't move with it, and we want them to move with it, so we'll click them, shift select the sword, then finally shift select the handle, and press parent. Now whenever we move or rotate or scale the sword handle, everything else goes along with it. Okay, so this is just our very base model of a sword here. I'm gonna press A to select everything, S to scale, because it's a little big for a sword, maybe a giant sword. And okay, so to put this in our pocket, let's just open this pocket up. We've got this special sword stuff pocket we made. We could, put it in anything, but we're gonna put it in the one we made for it. And I'm gonna go ahead and rename the sword from cube to sword, although it doesn't, really matter that much. And then to put something in your pocket, all you do is select all the things that you want to go into your pocket and press put in my pocket. So for this, it's the whole sword, so I'll press A to select everything. And there's nothing really else in the scene, so I don't have to worry about it getting selected and put in there. And then the final thing you want to, make note of when you're putting stuff in is that the active object, and in Blender, that in your outliner, that's whatever is highlighted in orange here. Basically, the last thing you selected or shift selected is the active object, is the name that the object will take on in your pocket. You know, if you're using show pocket labels, because if that kind of thing's important to you. Okay, with it selected, select this pocket here, press put in my pocket, and now that sword's in our pocket. Which, this is fine, but I think it might be cool to have these represented with the matte cap shading. Now, of course, when you set things to matte cap shading in the 3D view, nothing is going to actually render like this. This is basically just for your own fun or use while you're modeling. And same thing goes with the thumbnails that will show up when we put things in our pocket. It's basically just a nice way to be able to visualize things without actually having to add a material or worry about that just yet in the development stage there. So we've got this nice shiny bit. That'll probably be good. So let's put that in the pocket. And now I've got a nice shiny sword there. I'll go ahead and click on this other one here so I can delete it. And so we just got that base sword there. Let's add some variation to this one, because another really great feature about this is just being able to edit a bunch of things simultaneously and then compare changes you're making, stuff like that. Ooh, that looks really cool. Just adding a loop cut there. Much skinnier, cool looking blade going on there. Nice to scale. Using my sweet auto align view here. Quickly get into the desired. Ooh, that looks sweet. Orthographic view without having to know which one I actually want or hunt for a hotkey. Ooh, that's cool. That looks awesome. Now, of course, it is possible to actually render things out with matte cap, but that's not what we're using right now. We're just using basically a nice shading option Blender has, which can be helpful when modeling. That is looking pretty sweet. Let's add some loop cuts here. Extrude that out. I like that. You know what? We've currently got this sword handle deal mirrored for left and right, basically. But it would probably be all right to have it mirrored also on this other side. So everything basically I did on this side, I didn't have to worry about also doing on that side, in the same way that whatever I edit over here gets done over there. So I could cycle through Shift W to do that, but there's also a more precise way to deal with that if you want, and that is with the new updated clone mirror option in the builder menu. So let me go over these options real quick. If I were to double right click over here and add a Suzanne head, which I've got that nice Terminator 2 shading going on for Suzanne. By default, this is set to mirror, which will just mirror a thing. So if we press X, we can't really see the effects of that mirror because Suzanne's head's already symmetrical. But if I were to press Tab to go into edit mode and select a face and E to extrude. Now if you press X mirror, you can see it getting mirrored, or Y mirror, we can see it mirroring around Y, Z, and what have you. This also works for, you know, multiple selected objects, so useful like that too. Clone mirror will mirror the thing, but it will also clone it at the same time. So with this set to clone mirror here, if we press Z, it will clone these Suzanne heads, but also mirror them. as you can see. A little difficult to make heads or tails that when doing multiple objects with that particular setup there. So we'll just have one selected, and then there you go. That probably makes a lot more sense. So we could select those again and clone mirror those to Y. Then shift select all those and clone mirror it on X. So now we've got a big crazy selection of junk. Could switch this back to mirror and just mirror it regular back to Y here. And then you have negative bisect and positive bisect mirror, which will do the same thing as when you press Shift W with one object selected and cycle through. However, when you do that with this menu, you can actually do that for a bunch of different selected objects. So if I were to press D to duplicate this a bunch, and then switch this to negative bisect mirror, which means negative XYZ, and we were to do that for Z there, then all of these objects get bisected and mirrored along the negative Z axis. If I were to press Control Z on that and switch this to positive and press Z, then we get the opposite mirroring there. Okay, so that's enough about that. I'm going to press X to delete all those guys and get back to the task at hand. Select that, hold Alt and tap middle mouse button. And what we want is for this side to get mirrored like that, which I don't know exactly what I'm going to need to press there. I'm thinking Z. No, that's not right. Let's see. The good thing is we can press this, and nope, that wasn't it, and press Control Z until it does what we want it to. Yay! It was Y on the positive. Oh, got that done. Let's press Tab, go into Edit Mode, as to Scale. Maybe extrude that. Ooh, that looks nice. All right, there's definitely no need to get super fancy with this. I think I'll make this one, the blade, a bit smaller. Alt scroll up to go into orthographic. Tab to go into Edit Mode. Shift scroll down for vertex selection. Z for wireframe. B to select these. Maybe select all these. G to grab, middle mouse to constrain. B to border select, just like those. There we go. It's like a Grecian looking deal. I have no idea. I don't know what different cultures' swords look like. But thinking maybe. All right, that's cool. So we've got this sweet variation. And we could bother naming it or not. I'm not going to worry about that. Press A to select everything, and then Shift select what I've named the actual sword. So that's the name it will take on at the very least. And then press put in my pocket. And so now we've got these sweet sword variations here. Now these preview thumbnails will be generated automatically. However, if you want, you can actually use the camera view to manually control how these previews get saved. And to do that, we can click on the settings here, and under these pocket options here, we can press user thumbnails. So if I come down here in my camera, I'm like, you know what? I really want, I want it to be like from the bottom up. This is how I want the thumbnail of this object to look or whatever. I want it to be like that. We can do that. This time when we press put in my pocket, it'll be way too close. So let's zoom out some. Press put in my pocket. And there you go. So we've got that there, looking like that there, and what have you. Or we could turn on the visibility of our actual camera and select it manually here in the 3D view, maybe turn on our transform widget, and we can use this to get even more precise control. Like say we wanted it like sideways like that. Something like that. Put that in my pocket. Oh, whoops. You know what I did? I just put the camera in the pocket. That's why it's invisible, because cameras aren't visible. You have to actually select the things you want to go in the pocket to go in the pocket. So turn off that transform widget. Don't want to press A to select everything, otherwise it will select that camera currently. I could go ahead and turn that off, so I have that freedom to tap A and only select the sword. Now let's put her back in there, put it in my pocket. And once again, we're probably going to have to zoom out a little bit, put it in the pocket again. And we have a nice sideways of that. That one probably looks the coolest though. This one we definitely don't need, so let's click on this. These are all the same object. They just have been put in there with different thumbnails. And let's get rid of that and get rid of the thing where we put a camera in there, which we definitely don't need. And I think I'll delete that one too. What I'm doing right now is not important. I think you get the basic idea. So at one point when you create a bazillion pockets and you've got all sorts of stuff going on, if it ever gets really advanced, you can use this search menu to only display things alphabetically. So for instance, if we were to type P, it's only going to show the original pocket. Or if we were to type in S and then get more specific, it'll only show the pockets with that. And in that way, you can create category systems if you want. So for instance, say you were working on a movie and you want to preface your pocket with some name, I don't know, whatever. You can do that and then, search by that category. Of course, if you want to bring this thing into your file, either one of these, so we can click on that original one, got that there. If we want this linked, which will create grouped instances that remain linked. And of course, a group instance of a linked object or objects is much better because if you just link an object to a file, then it's got like this teal blue highlight and you can't do anything with it. You can't move it or animate it or anything. So if we want to do that, we can click that. And now we've got this single grouped instance here, which we can do stuff in. Yeah. So if you ever want to delete one of these pocket folders you created, you can press this X button, and don't worry if you accidentally press this, because when you press it the first time, you'll get this message, and if you're like, whoops, didn't mean to press that, you can click no. But if you want to get rid of it, you can click that, and then just press yes, then that pocket is totally gone. You cannot delete the default pocket, however. If you try to do that, it'll say, hey, you can't delete or rename the default pocket. A really awesome synergy between this pocket tool and the align to grid foursquare is that, say you create a pocket of like, I don't know, like pipe fittings, 2 T's, 1 T, I'm a really bad speller. So you've got like pipe fittings. There's probably no need for me to actually make this. Actually, I don't need to do that bottom part. I'll just press Shift W and rotate around until it's not negative Z. Let's put Shift W until I get to positive Z. There we go. So yeah, say you're making something like this or any other kind of Legos or house beams for architecture, whatever, you can use Pocket to quickly replicate, fabricate all these things and store a bunch of different variations. So we can go ahead and rename this to pipe, I guess, and press put in my pocket. So we've got this where we can quickly pull these parts out, and then we can use our align to grid foursquare to quickly make whatever kind of things we're making flush with the grid in whatever direction we need. Say for instance, we wanted to fit one of these with the bottom of one of these, but we wanted to be 100% certain that this was, these were meeting exactly. We could press this here. Now these are perfectly fit with each other. So we got all these, so we can make a variation on this. I don't know, add some loop cuts. Maybe extrude these, scale them in. And our snap is still on here. Maybe add some more loop cuts. Alt-Shift to loop select these, some sort of weird piece. And I'm going to go ahead and press E to extrude again. Add another line there. Okay, so we've got some weird new piece to add to our fun little collection. So we could rename this to, I don't know, other pipe thing. And put this in our pipe fittings. So we just have this selected and we press put in my pocket. So now we've got these two things here. So we could grab that original piece out. We could hold Alt and flick middle mouse up so we can go into orthographic view. And wouldn't you know it, these aren't fitting flushly, so we can use our align to grid 4 square here and do the same for this guy. And look at that. Well, we've still got to align it from the top here. But yeah, I think you get the basic idea. Okay, gonna start up a new file. Okay, so the last thing regarding updates and the builder menu, there is a new feature on shape tools, which if you're unfamiliar with shape tools, what they are is basically like Illustrator's path tools, but with 3D objects. You can use them with any mesh object that you make, but there's also this quick little shape generation bar to help you get the ball rolling. So say I could click that to add a cylinder shape. And the way these work is whatever you have selected will become the shape tool of whatever button you press. So you only have to have one thing selected and you just get it near or touching whatever you want it to affect, like this cube. And then we press cut out, or we could press combine, which will combine these shapes. If we kind of go in there and see the inside, you can see how this is now merged into a single shape inside of here. And of course, intersect, which will intersect that there. I'll go ahead and switch this back to cutout. One of the coolest features about shape tools is its ability to let you duplicate the shape tools and their effects will carry over. So if I have this cube selected that's cutting out on this, or no, this sphere, this cylinder thing selected that's cutting out this cube, I can press D to duplicate this and it duplicates that shape tool, automatically carrying over its effect, which is pretty sweet. And with two of these selected, I could press D again and do something like this. So a few versions back was added this little button here, which will add a thickness slider to whatever shape tool you're using, which is pretty sweet. So if I click this, this will now say thickness, and I can use this thickness slider to control the way even further that this shape tool is affecting whatever object we decided to do this stuff to, which happened to be this cube. The new feature available in Sensei Format 5.51 is that we can activate thickness for all of these selected objects, but also we can control the thickness values of all objects selected at the same time. So I've got these 4 objects, their thickness values are affecting our cube that they're working on there. So you can see we can increase and decrease these all at the same time, or I could do this to just the selected tool or what have you. Add a sphere here, maybe set it to intersect everything. Of course, it's got its own thickness slider as well. And get the basic idea there. So I could press apply to finish that up. And now we've got a crazy looking shape thing. One of my favorite things to do after playing with shape tools is to grab the thing up into the air, press Shift A, and under Mesh add a plane. Open up Physics Sim, press Add Passive, click on the thing that we diced up, and press Add Active, then Separate, then Play. I love to watch stuff that I cut up with shape tools fall apart and then play with the pieces. It's a lot of fun. We could turn on high def shading and it becomes even more interesting to look at. Okay, enough fooling around. Sensei Format 5.51 has an amazing new set of tools for handling curves called C-Array. So if I press T to bring up my tool shelf here, the C-Array options show up in Builder's dynamic menu area here, and we call this a dynamic menu because as you're doing different things, the options in this part of the Builder menu will change based on the context of what you're doing. So if I double right click here and under curve, add a path, which of course a path is just another kind of curve. But if we add a path curve here, press tab to go into edit mode, select this last point on it, alt scroll up to jump into orthographic view. I'll press G to grab and press E to extrude this path out a little bit, so we have a little bit of a interesting little path here. We'll press tab to go back into object mode. So if you have just a curve or path selected, you'll see these options here. So this button completes your curve or path. And then these options here, we won't really be able to see what this does until we get an object connected to the path. So let's select this cube here, and I'm going to Alt scroll up to jump into orthographic view. Press G to grab and move this cube near the beginning of this path here. So if we have one or more objects selected and then we shift select a curve or path, you'll see these two awesome new options, C array and no stretch. And these two options perform very similar functions. However, there's one really awesome and important key difference. If we use C array, which if we press it right now, we can do that. The object or objects you select will snap perfectly to the beginning and end of the curve or path. They will repeat the exact amount needed to fill the length of the path, and they will merge organically into each other. So if we were to press tab to go into edit mode and select this last point on this path here and press E to extrude, notice that as we extrude this, the curve automatically generates the objects, which is just this simple cube, to merge and extend and follow the length of the curve. So if we press tab to go back into object mode and click on the original cube here, you'll notice over here in the modifier tab of the properties panel, which shows whatever modifiers are on whatever object you have selected, that a curve and array modifier was added to this object. So if we hide the visibility of the effects of each modifier, we can see here's the original cube. What's awesome about the C array tools is that they don't just plop on some modifiers to this object and then hope for the best. The tool does a lot of behind the scenes stuff, making sure all the settings are properly filled out to work, as well as adjusting transform values for the objects that are using the curve modifier. And what this does is it ensures that if we turn on the visibility of these effects, that the object perfectly follows in the right direction of the curve or path and snaps perfectly to the beginning and end of it. So right now we just have this, very simple cube doing this, but let's go ahead and model this cube into something a lot more interesting. So I'm going to hide the effects of the curve and the array modifier on this cube. A while ago, I made a tutorial for the Blender Crash Course wherein we create and animate a roller coaster. And probably a good 25% of that video was just making the tracks, which was sort of an awful slog to have to do. So most of that, or not most, but at least a lot of that video could be entirely replaced with the one new C array button added to Sensei Format 5.51. So what I'm going to do is mirror this thing to make it easier to model. So I'm going to press Shift W, then Shift W again, so we can get a negative Y mirror. So I press tab to go into edit mode, A to select everything, and S to scale. You can see that the cube has been bisected here, and that's also where it's mirroring. So I'll select this point here, press E to extrude this out a bit here. Then I'm going to select this face and shift select this face here and press Control E to do a individual extrude to make sure these track pieces are the same length here. And then what I'm going to do is shift select all of these faces and shift select these at the bottom as well. And I'm going to do another Control E extrude here. And I'm going to press Shift W and scroll my mouse up so I can add about 4 loop cuts here and click that down. Then I'm going to press space for face selection and shift select these faces in the middle, press G to grab, and bring these down a little bit so they're indented, and maybe also do the same over here so there's just a little bit more definition to these tracks. Okay, so now if we press tab to go back into object mode and click these eye icons back here, we can see some really interesting tracks which are being auto created and forming and filling out this path here. So right now, if we were to tap W to add some smooth shading and a subsurface modifier to this, we'll see some strangeness going on. And this is actually happening because if we press tab to go into edit mode, these faces here at the beginning and ends of these track pieces are merging with each other, and Blender does not like that. So what we're going to do is shift select these. And it may also help to hide the effects of the subsurface modifier, so you can just select the faces belonging to the beginning and the ends of this thing like this. Press X to delete. And I'm also going to get rid of these little faces in here. We don't need these. Okay, so press tab. Go ahead and get rid of these faces too, which are causing some strangeness. Okay, so now we have this nice simple piece of mesh for this organically repeating track here. You tap W to increase the subsurface smoothing a little bit. And now when we click back on this path, if we press tab to go into edit mode, whenever we extrude this line, this track will just be automatically filled out, and it will just continue forever for as long as we make this thing. We can keep extruding points. You can also click on any point and press X and delete the vertices, and it won't, mess up your track or anything like that. It'll just make the curve a bit smoother. So if you need to do that, you can. So this is really good for any type of repeating object you need to organically mesh together like this. So roads, tracks, like maybe even the spinal column of an animal, or pretty much anything like that. Okay, so C-Array is great for instantly generating stuff like this along a curve or path. But what about things that you need to follow a curve or path which do not merge, and you really do not want to be distorted by a bending curve or path? Like, say for instance, a group of dominoes were following this line. We wouldn't want those dominoes to be squished or bent around the corners of this path. And for that, we have no stretch. So I'm going to press tab to go back into object mode, and I'm going to press Shift A, and under mesh here, I'm going to add a torus shape. And then I'm going to move over to the right view and hold Alt and scroll my middle mouse button up here. To go into orthographic view, press R to rotate, hold Control to constrain to get it to rotate perfectly up and down. And then I'm going to press S to scale, because what I'm going to do is make some like kind of bridge supports for this thing that go along this organic track here. So press Alt and scroll middle mouse up to get an orthographic view again. Tab to go into edit mode. And rather than pressing S to scale this up or down, I'm going to shrink fatten, which you can also do by pressing this button, by pressing Alt S, because I want this to be a bit thinner here, like this. And maybe scale that down. Something like that. Maybe even scale it up a little bit like that. Alt scroll up again. Then I'm going to press Shift scroll down for vertex selection, and Z for wireframe, B to do a border select, and select these bottom half of vertex points, and press X to delete those. And press tab to go back into object mode, Z to go back into solid viewport shading. And I'm going to go ahead and bisect and mirror modifier this too. So I'll do the same thing I did back when this track was a cube, and I'll press Shift W, then Shift W again, and then let go of that, and that will mirror along the y-axis. Very rarely, but occasionally, the bisect, when it is cutting things in half, it may get it just slightly off. So what we're going to have to do is press tab to go into edit mode, Alt select these faces here, press X to delete them, Shift scroll up for edge selection, and then Alt select this loop of edges here and press E to extrude and bring those together to where they're touching. And then I'm going to tap W to give this some smooth shading. I'm going to press, let's see, S to scale this down maybe just a little bit more. And maybe we'll bring that up ever so slightly. And let's Shift scroll up for edge selection, then Alt select this loop of edges here. Press E to extrude, middle mouse to constrain so that this extrudes straight down. So we've got something like this. Maybe we can add some loop cuts here. Check out, make sure that's even there. And let's press E to extrude again. We'll press X to delete those faces because once again, where things are mirrored, you don't want there to be mesh touching each other, like the faces to be like clamped up against each other. I think you get what I mean here. We'll press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain and bring those in to where they're touching. I'll press Shift W over here to add another loop cut. And space for face selection, Alt select this ring of loop of faces, then Alt Shift to add this other selection of faces, S to scale, middle mouse to constrain to bring this down like this. And so we got something like that. All right, nothing too fancy. With this particular object here, we want it to be able to follow the track, but we don't want it merging or being distorted. Like we don't want these pieces bending around this track here. We just want them to be rotated. So for that, we use no stretch. So the same as we did with the original track object, which was just a cube back then, but we'll select our little brace thing here, then we'll shift select the curve, and we have our options again, but this time we're going to press no stretch. And when we do, these objects are now perfectly following this line here. However, in this particular instance, there's some things we might want to change. If you're making an actual track, then you probably want all of these track pieces to be able to face down vertically. So that's what this option here for twist method is. So first of all, if we switch this to Z up, that means the Z axis of this track will always face up, which means if this track was intentionally built by people, then most likely, you know, it's not going to be like an F0 wall that's like, you know, bending over to the side and doing something crazy. But then we still don't have these objects facing down exactly like we want. And that's why you'll notice that after you add no stretch and you click back on an object that you did, you'll see this lock rotation menu here. And we can use this to lock the X and the Y axis to make these all facing down. Now currently these aren't all facing down because this object's transform needs to be applied. And I don't want to get too much into, you know, explaining object transforms, but just know that occasionally when you rotate and scale things, that the transform of that object needs to be applied. So we can do that by clicking dimensions, then pressing apply all, which would be the same as going down, pressing apply for location, apply for rotation, apply for dimensions. And as soon as we do that, we can see now that these track pieces are all facing down perfectly in the way that we want. So now if we click on our path, press tab to go into edit mode, and we were to select one of these points, we can press E to extrude. And this thing just gets longer and crazier and, you know, does whatever we want. The track pieces that you add with C array will automatically extend, but the objects that you use no stretch on, you have to manually increase their number. And you can do that by clicking on the actual path and increasing or decreasing this offset value here. So if we were to lower that, it would reduce the number of those things. But as we increase it, they obviously get higher. So we could press Shift C to reset the cursor to the center of the grid, press Shift A, and under Mesh, add a plane. S to scale this out. And select these track pieces, press tab to go into edit mode. And I'm gonna press Alt, tap middle mouse button to zoom in on the original one because I'm getting a little confused here. And shift scroll down for vertex selection, Z to do a box select, B to do a box select there and select just these bottom parts of the feet. So I wanna go back into Z, it's a solid viewport shading, and I press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain. I can bring all of these down to the length of past the floor here, which is pretty cool. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I'm probably going to be dedicating an entire tutorial to this. Just want to make you aware of its existence. I'm going to press my full screen button and I'm going to turn on HD shading, which looks really sweet with all this stuff here. And under display, I'm going to click only render and world background. Press T to dismiss my tool shelves here. And what I'm going to do is come down here and press Shift F, which sends you into walk mode. Then we can use WASD to move around, and our mouse we can use to steer like a basic first-person shooter. And we're just going to walk along this thing. I fell off the track. You know what? It'd probably be a little bit easier if these guards here were a little higher. So let me turn only render off. Select this thing, press tab to go into edit mode. Press Alt and tap middle mouse so I can zoom in on the original bit. It's a little crazy looking here. I want to select all of this here, so I'm holding Alt Shift and then clicking to loop select and increase my loop selection. G to grab to make these up much higher, and maybe A to select everything, G to grab, and make this a little wider too. Okay, I think that'll work a lot better. Now it's time for fun time. Let's turn only render back on, dismiss this, and press Shift F again to enter walk mode. And I have to walk real carefully not to fall off the sides of these tracks here. When you're in walk mode, you can also use the middle mouse button to kind of like link a hook shot to stuff, which I fell when I did that. Let's see if I can hook shot up to that top one there. No. This would probably be a lot better example if I made like a road or a path and not a track, but I think you get the basic idea. Here's how you can have a little bit of fun after you make something here. So I'm going to click to get out of that and press T to open up my tool shelf, property shelf, turn off only render and world background, close display, and press the full screen button again to get out of that. So you can get as detailed and crazy with this as you want. You could add all sorts of different other objects such as light fixtures or stairs or whatever, anything you wanted to be repeating on this track, and then you'd be able to instantly extend all of it, not just the organically connected tracks, but everything else, the stuff that is not getting distorted or bent, and just by extruding one point on the track, which is awesome. So a really cool idea with this would just be to make a bunch of different like kind of track pieces and maybe create a custom pocket for track pieces. And you know, you could have basically a whole amusement park in your pocket. One other thing I want to mention about the options of these curves and paths that are now available in the builder menu. If you press tab to go into edit mode, you probably notice these tilt and radius features. So what we can do is select on these different points of the path, and we can increase this tilt value, which will tilt our tracks if we did want to make things a bit more F-Zero-y. Or if you're working on something that's not a road, you know, or a path, it's, you know, something else that uses this that you need to be able to tilt at different points. So this is really useful. Ooh, could you imagine making like a crazy, like it goes straight up and then spirals? That would be really sweet. Then we have radius, which we can use to increase the size of that curve and the point around it. So notice that everything connected to the track either gets bigger or smaller as I increase or decrease these radius values. So notice if I select multiple of these, this switches from radius to radii because it's then controlling the values of multiple of these things. So maybe you made some sort of crazy Python and you want to be able to make parts of it fatter or bigger or whatever. These values can also be animated. So yeah, that's cool. You could have a wobbly, crazy tilt spinning thing. So to animate these values, or most other values like this, you can just tap I over the value there. Or excuse me, when you have an individual value selected, it can be animated, like the tilt value here, but you're not able to animate multiple of them selected at a time. But still, you could animate the individual tilt and radius values to do sweet stuff. All right, we're finally almost ready to wrap this up. What I want to talk about last are some new features for parenting armatures, as well as the Sensei Format pose library. So to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is go into my utilities folder, examples, archive, and I got this rigged.blend file from an older tutorial here. And I'm going to drag that out into the 3D view. And let's press T to bring up our tool shelf and click on the armature here. And right now this armature is displaying in wire mode. There's actually several different modes that you can display your armatures in. This is the default one, the octahedral here. We'll go ahead and switch it to that just because people are probably more used to seeing that. But to add a pose library for this thing, all we do is press Add Pose Library. And in Sensei Format 5.51, we'll see some really sweet new features to the pose library. First, you'll probably notice that the layout has changed a little bit from the original one if you're a Sensei Format user. Next, you'll notice this option here, Selected Bones Only. By default, if we were to, say, click on something and click on something else and make some sort of pose, you know what, I don't want to look at this as octahedral. I'm going to switch it back to wire. It's a lot easier to see the actual character. Okay, so say you made some pose like this, and we press Save Pose. We'll see this pose option here. So if we were to press Reset, this would take us back to our default stance. And if we click Pose, that will automatically use that pose. That's another new feature in this latest version of Sensei Format. You don't have to click on the pose and then click Use or something like that. It happens automatically as you select it. But if we choose this Selected Bones Only option, what this will do is any of the buttons that we use will only affect whatever bones we have selected. So we can shift select to select add multiple bones. So with this selected, if I press Reset, it will only reset the bones I had selected to the default pose rather than the whole thing. So if I were to go ahead and turn that off and press Reset here, and then make some other kind of pose, of course using Alt scroll up to enter into an orthographic view here. And it's pretty gravity defying one here. I know, something weird. Sure. Why not? Maybe we'll raise one of those hands up there and we will save that pose there. And once you have more than one pose, of course, when you click on a different pose, you'll automatically be using that pose. But if you click it again, you can rename it. So we'll call this Almost Falling. And we'll call this, I don't know. That's what we'll call it. I don't know, and Almost Falling here. Say we had been working on a pose, but we only want to affect, like, say I only want that foot action to be replaced. If I click Selected Bones Only, and then just hold C to, I guess, do a circle select of this brush, and I click on Almost Falling, then only the foot bones will take that pose that I clicked on rather than the default, which is the entire armature. Now, of course, if you armature an object properly using .L and .R for the different sides of the bones, which, by the way, Sensei Format handles that automatically when using the mirror options when you're creating an armature. But if you have that done correctly, whenever you press Flip Pose, you can perfectly flip the pose. But say we only wanted that part of the arm on here, we could shift select these, or just C to do a quick circle select, turn select bones only, and press flip pose there. Or I guess it would be the reverse of that. We would shift select or circle select the thing that we want to go over to the other side, press flip pose, and there you go. So let's quickly see what this looks like animated. I'm going to press reset. I'll turn off selected bones only, press reset for everything. And then I'm going to press F to insert a keyframe and click on this pose here, F to insert another keyframe, click on this other pose, F to insert another keyframe. And let's see how this looks going to these different keyframes here. Pretty funny. And we'll go ahead and mirror the whole thing there. All right, new to the pose library in 5.51, if we click this button here, we can easily select from different pose libraries or create a new pose library. Here's the one that we were using just now. I'll go ahead and rename this to new. That's probably not a very descriptive name, but we can click on this empty one and press X to delete that. Well, I maybe call this basic. But if you want to add a whole new collection of poses, you can press add new library. And then we could rename it to my great new lib or whatever. And we could make up all sorts of new crazy poses, such as this. And press save pose. And we can very easily flip these poses. Let's press F to insert a keyframe, flip pose, F to insert a keyframe, and then mirror both of that. And then mirror it all again. Press A and mirror it all again. So we've got about 8 seconds of this silliness going on. All right, so that's gonna about do it for this video. There's a couple of small features and things I probably didn't mention. If you wanna get real obsessive about it and see every bug fix, every tweak, everything available in this latest version of Sensei Format, be sure just to check out the Sensei Format update log, which you can access at blendersensei.com under the resources here. And scroll down and check out even more of this stuff and possibly see what I missed in this video. I'm definitely going to be releasing a bunch of smaller videos covering more in detail these different tools and how to weave using them together to do sweet stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you are as stoked as I am about so many of these freaking crazy awesome new features in Sensei Format 5.51. So yeah, cheers. Whoops, forgot one more little thing I wanted to mention about a new parenting menu regarding armatures and bones and stuff that makes it a little more easy to do. So for instance, say I wanted to parent this wine glass to this little character's hand. The way I would do that is bring it over here, and then we want to select the actual armature and make sure we're in pose mode, and then select the bone that we want it to be parented to. So probably this little hand here, we would select that. Then we can click on the cup, and next we're going to want to shift select this armature. So I actually want to do that from the outliner because it's a little difficult to directly shift select an armature because Blender ends up trying to select the object that it's inside of instead. So we'll shift select that, and when we do, we'll see this nice little menu up here which explains to us in what ways we might want to parent this object to this bones. And it says stretchy or strict. Stretchy is good for clothes, basically stuff you want bending with the mesh, and strict is good for accessories like a pencil or a gun or a wine glass. So we'll click strict here, And now when we press G to grab and move this hand, this wine glass is parented to this hand in a way that we want. Whereas if we were to say Shift A and add a cylinder, and then Alt scroll up to go into orthographic view, R to rotate, Control to constrain, get it flat there. Maybe press Tab to go into edit mode, Shift W to give it some edge loops, and scroll the mouse up to add some loop cuts and click a few times to confirm that. Tab to go back into object mode. Maybe you press W a few times, give it some smoothing, S to scale. So say I had some sort of weird like armband thing. This would be something I would probably want to parent using stretchy. So what we would do is once again select the bones that we want involved in this whole situation and go into pose mode so we can select them, and then shift select these two. I think that's going to cover it. Yeah, those two bones there. Then we want to select the object, and then I'm going to once again shift select the armature down in the outliner just because it's easier to make sure I click on it first and not the object's mesh. Then our little parent options are here, so we can do stretchy. And now when we grab one of these bones, check it out. We've got a sweet parented arm, whatever going on here, as well as Mr. Rigged holding, and looks like he's had maybe a little bit too much to drink there. I better put him to bed. So thanks for watching, and see you later.